Nepal. Police in Kathmandu fired tear gas, rubber bullets, and water cannons. More than 70 demonstrators have been arrested. Why is Nepal in turmoil? A contentious aid grant from the United States has triggered violent clashes in the South Asian nation.
Protest in Kathmandu against MCC has turned violent. The police officials were forced to use water cannons on the protesters to disperse them. Following the demonstrations, the protesters also pelted stones on the police officials.
Protesters clashed with riot police outside Nepal's parliament in opposition to plans to approve infrastructure projects funded by the United States. The reason? The Millennium Challenge Corporation, or MCC. MCC, Washington's anti-poverty project, agreed in 2017 to provide $500 million in grants to fund a 300-kilometer electricity transmission line and a road improvement project in the Himalayan country. After signing the MCC pact, the government has been struggling to get a formal consent in the parliament, and the deadline is approaching.
Washington has repeatedly said that it will not reconsider the deadline, and if Nepal fails to pass the MCC compact by February 28, it will lose the grant.
So, the MCC has really become a hot political potato between the various political parties in Nepal. Basically, it's a very good project. It's a project for $630 million, out of which $500 million US is a grant. It's a grant. It's not a loan. There's no interest. It's a grant for building transmission lines, for rural roads, infrastructure in Nepal. So it's a very good project. But somehow or the other, the feeling in Nepal is that this project, or the MCC projects in general, belong to or are part of the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US, and that this Indo-Pacific strategy is against China. And so the communist parties in particular, some of the communist parties led by former Prime Ministers Prachanda and Madhav Kumar Nepal, are arguing that this project is not in Nepal's interest.
Lawmakers have begun debating the deal. Some claim the grant will not have to be repaid and comes with no strings. But opponents say the agreement would undermine Nepal's laws and sovereignty, as lawmakers would have insufficient oversight of the board directing the infrastructure project. Major opposition comes from Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba's own coalition partners, including two of the communist parties, who are seen as traditionally close to China.
This project, the MCC Nepal Compact, which is funded by the United States, is really becoming a political issue in Nepal. It has been there for almost 10 years now, an agreement for 5 years. But what's happening is that no political party in Nepal has had the courage to explain that this is a development economics-oriented project. And because Nepali political parties and people are so concerned about preserving their excellent relations with China, they're automatically boycotting, protesting, delaying all types of other relationships.
China has focused on Nepal for the past several years to control it politically and strategically. What does it stand to lose if it accepts the US grant? And what are America's strategic interests in Nepal? Or is this just a political stunt by opponents to grab power?
frankly, if you ask most Nepali political leaders, they do not know the technicalities of this agreement, but they're just using it for positionment. And let's not forget that Nepal is going for elections again sometime later this year. Nepali political parties themselves have dragged China in, right? They have gone to China saying, here's an American project. We will oppose if you support us to form a government, if you do this with us. So it's often the pull factor from Nepal that has dragged China into. Let's not forget that. But the other part of the story, which I think we should not ignore and cannot ignore, is that China is actively launching media campaigns, reaching out through media, think tanks, government, to spread misinformation, and really coerce also different Nepali decision makers not to do this deal with the United States of America. So this is a new actor we have in Nepal today.
Nepal relies heavily on foreign aid, and donors coordinate development aid policy through the Nepal Development Forum, whose members include donor countries and international financial organizations. And this is where China has a hidden agenda. Home to 1/3 of the Himalayan mountains and wedged between two of the world's most populous nations, Nepal has always been of strategic importance to China. It is also a key ally in China's crackdown on the Tibetan independence movement. In 2019, Xi Jinping became the first Chinese president in more than 2 decades to visit Nepal. But the visit came at a cost. Nepalese authorities rounded up Tibetans to prevent protests during Xi Jinping's stay. Nepal is home to around 20,000 exiled Tibetans, but under pressure from Beijing, the then communist government of Nepal took an increasingly hardline position on them. Xi Jinping said he would use his visit to renew friendship and explore cooperation with his Nepali friends.
We are willing to encourage more Chinese tourists to visit Nepal, using Nepal's 2020 Year of Tourism as an opportunity. We are willing to increase our investment in education and cultural cooperation and enhance the bonds between our two peoples. We are willing to support friendships between more cities and provinces in the two countries and let the seeds of friendship in the two countries fall to the ground and take root.
The bilateral relation between Nepal and China is defined by the Sino-Nepalese Treaty of Peace and Friendship, signed on April 28, 1960 by the two countries. From 1975 onwards, Nepal has maintained a policy of balancing the competing influence of China and India.
There is no more interesting place these days to observe the geostrategic turbulence in Asia than Nepal. This is a place that is coming under different areas of influence, interests. The Chinese are very active in Nepal, more than they've ever been before. India, of course, has deep interests in Nepal and is a strong and close partner to Nepal. It tells you also how Nepal is concerned about its foreign policy autonomy, right? A country that was landlocked between India and China had very little freedom to, do foreign policy, suddenly Great China shows up, gives them an alternative. So they're very keen in preserving that relationship with China.
Nepal now sees huge economic opportunities in China, whether it's business, investments, education, tourism. So they think that they have a lot to benefit from economic and other cooperation with China. But what has actually happened in the last few years is that not only has this economic engagement increased, and Nepal is a very strong signatory to the Belt and Road Initiative of China, but China since 2016 onwards is playing not only a role in promoting economic cooperation, but they are very deeply involved in Nepal's internal politics.
Nepal and China continued their cooperation last year, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The two countries also made progress, in particular in areas including vaccines, infrastructure building, investment, and trade. Overall, it has received 13.8 million doses of Chinese vaccines in total, either granted or procured from the northern neighbor. This is a tweet by Ho Jiangqi, the ambassador of the People's Republic of China to Nepal. Look at these pictures. Remember who? She created headlines when the Nepal-India map row emerged. She has been called the architect of Nepal's map dispute with India. She is said to have been a key inspiring factor in former Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli's unanticipated decision to redraw the Himalayan Republic's map.
Those deeper relations are being used by China to shape the internal affairs of Nepal. That influence, or that interference, if you want, has grown over the last few years. The border dispute between India and Nepal in 2020 on the Kalapani region was supported and instigated by China. So China has been often using Nepal also to upset relations with India.
Who was also widely criticized for playing an active role in 2020 for trying to keep the Oli government afloat.
You had the ambassador of China rather openly meeting with different political leaders, not only government officials, but different political party leaders, trying to ensure the stability of the previous government led by Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. That is not only because that government was communist. That ideological factor is important, but it's not the main factor. The main factor is that Nepal wants a strong and stable government that can protect Chinese interests in Nepal.
What we now see in something new vis-a-vis China is this, effort to resolve internal political problems, especially amongst the communist parties of Nepal. I think this is something very new. This has not happened in the past.
Beijing is seen to have increased its political influence over Kathmandu. China has managed to do this with what it does best, investments and loans that lead to the Chinese debt trap. In April and May 2015, two massive earthquakes created havoc in the Himalayan nation, killing over 10,000 people. Gorkha and Nuwakot were the worst hit districts. It received substantial aid from India, the U.S. and China. However, China's stamp on the landscape of post-earthquake Nepal is evident. In 2017, Nepal signed up to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
I personally feel these are two unrelated, issues. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative is a huge multi-billion-dollar program, and if this train ever comes from Tibet to Kathmandu, it's going to cost several $billion. So there are issues of financing, of technology, of the geology of the Himalayas, the engineering. It's very complicated issues. The Millennium Challenge Corporation is an immediate project. You'll see the benefits of this in the next 2 or 3 years, and it's a small project. $500 million grant, $130 million the Nepalese will put in. So there's really no comparison.
Nepal remains one of the poorest and slowest growing economies in Asia. Ravaged by the pandemic, it's battling rising energy prices and inflation. Is it in a position to reject a grant of $500 million?
Nepal has nowhere near to a capacity to develop these projects without this external funding. In fact, Nepal's economy is coming under a crunch. The previous government and this government have underlined the urgency of attracting external finance more than ever.
Here are some interesting facts about ties between Nepal and the United States. On April 27, 1947, the United States recognized the Kingdom of Nepal. The two countries established diplomatic relations in 1948. And on August 9, 1959, the American Embassy at Kathmandu was established. However, so far, no serving American president has ever visited Nepal. Since the 1950s, the United States has provided more than $791 million in bilateral economic assistance to Nepal. But things have changed with the MCC grant. Nepal's political sphere and the public are polarized over the grant. Critics believe it's a part of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy that aims to counter China's growing influence in Asia. They also feel there is a hidden military component and that it could impede on Nepal's sovereignty. But how true are these claims?
See, there is no free lunch, right? There is no money that is, raining from the sky. The United States thinks through when it puts money into development projects, even if it is a dam, irrigation project, women empowerment. There are certain thoughts that countries put into where they want to spend their money. Sometimes it's only to reduce poverty, no doubt, in many countries, but there are also larger foreign policy. Now, there's a big difference between sending an economic project that really benefits the development of the country. This is $500 million into into energy, power interdependence, projects that Nepal has been asking for decades, right? That is what the US is funding, a transmission line between Nepal and India. Road building projects in areas of Nepal that remain disconnected, poor, because they do not have the infrastructure in terms of transportation. Now, those projects, obviously, for example, in terms of the transmission line with India, have an interest to connect Nepal with India, right? the United States probably thinks it is of interest to its own interest to deepen the ties between India and Nepal. In fact, if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy, the second version announced by the Biden administration a month ago, it says that it will encourage India's regional leadership and integration and connectivity, right? That it's in U.S. interest that a stronger India in the region is a U.S. interest, right? So that is clearly defined. But I mean, from there to jumping to some type of a defense security arrangement that tries to weaken Nepal, destabilize Nepal, create dependency of Nepal towards India, is going to see an U.S. army base in Nepal to launch operations into Tibet and weaken China. I think we're getting into the domain of fiction and science fiction even in some way.
Experts also believe that this is a wake-up call for India.
Once the Americans out of the game, and the British and the Europeans, etc., which the Chinese are directing their opposition to, they will come after Indian projects. They will ease India out of Nepal too, because Indian projects also have come under tremendous political pressure, often without Chinese support. So it'll be very easy for China to also mount a lot of misinformation campaigns to reduce Nepal's capacity to develop, connectivity infrastructure projects with India and Indian support.
While the U.S. has described the infrastructure grant as a gift from the American people to Nepal, China has warned the U.S. against carrying out coercive diplomacy. The infrastructure grant has been in a limbo for 4.5 years. In the midst of a political storm, Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba is walking a tightrope. Will Nepal accept the U.S. assistance?
It's a small country, and their objective should be to benefit from everyone, rather than getting involved in power play and tussles. And if they become a venue for this kind of power play, I don't know whether it will really benefit Nepal. I personally don't know whether this will, bring development to the people of Nepal.